The main reason why people invest their money is to make money, and that's generally done through two different ways. You can either do that through growth in your portfolio, or you can do it through income. And it seems recently that dividend investing seems to be a very popular topic, so today I wanted to give you 3 ETFs that will generate a monthly income for you. Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Matt, and as I mentioned in the intro, today I'm going to give you 3 ETFs that pay a monthly income. Now, a few things worth noting about these, and first thing I want to say is these will not have you quit your day job immediately. It's going to be a slow and steady process, but if done correctly, it could be a great source to supplement your current income. Also, as I was doing this, I had a few criteria points that I wanted to fit into these 3 ETFs. The first one is these all have expense ratios less than 1%. Now, I'm sure there are other ETFs out there that pay well or pay good dividends on a monthly basis and have a higher expense ratio, but I'm a firm believer in keeping the cost of your portfolio low, and so it's important for me to find these investments that have a relatively low expense ratio. The other is that these all pay monthly dividends. So we're not creating a ladder between these 3 where, January ETFA will pay, February ETFB will pay, and then March ETFC will pay. Each one of these will pay every month. And lastly, I try to minimize the amount of overlap between these investments. So there are funds in here that have stock exposure to them, but the stocks that they invest in should be different. So each of these will have a different goal and who they'll benefit from. But ultimately, if you owned all 3 of these ETFs, you wouldn't have a lot of overlap between the investments. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So the first ETF that I want to talk about today is going to be the SPDR Dow Jones Industrial Average ETF. Ticker symbol is DIA. So as the name of this fund implies, this ETF does track the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And it's actually one of the oldest ETFs. Now, started in 1998, so it's younger than I am, but it's still one of the older ETFs, so it has a lot more history behind it and a better track record to follow along with if that's something you're going to do your research on. Now, if you're not familiar with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it's one of the more commonly talked about US indexes that we use as a benchmark, and it invests in blue chip companies. It's also actually the smallest index that we have compared to the NASDAQ or the S&P 500. Now, who would benefit from holding on to this investment? Well, given that this investment is heavily invested into blue chip stocks, if you are somebody who's looking for income but also would like to experience some capital appreciation with this, then this is a good investment for you because it offers the best of both worlds there. Now, the investments inside of this company are relatively safe. You'll see companies like Apple, Goldman Sachs, Home Depot, so on and so forth. And they're relatively safe investments, but again, they are companies that do experience growth from time to time while also paying a dividend. So it's a great way for you to create an income source for yourself and watch your money grow as well. And I'm sure, as you all know, I'm a numbers guy, so let's talk a little bit here about these numbers. So right now, this is trading around $260 a share, which is on the high end. But again, given the companies you're getting exposure to, one share of this ETF is cheaper than a share of Apple, and on top of that, you're getting exposure to Home Depot, Goldman Sachs, the list I just listed. In 1 year's time frame between each month of dividends being paid out, it earned about $5.98 with. So that's why I mentioned it's not going to make you rich quick, but if you're somebody that is reinvesting these dividends and while also experiencing that growth, it could be an investment that is very profitable for you. It has an expense ratio of 0.16%, which is really good to see. Now, admittedly, that's probably a little high for an index ETF. Usually those are less than 0.1%, but it's nothing worth losing sleep over given the companies that you have the exposure to as well as receiving that monthly income. It has a dividend yield of 2.29% with a growth rate of 10.61%. I should mention when I talk about these growth rates here, this is over 5 years of average. So it's not last year because some of these have cut their dividends. So for this one, or for all of these, it's going to be over that 5 years. And so having a growth rate of about 10.61 over the past 5 years is really good to see. and they've been able to increase their dividend every year for the past 9 years. So that goes to show that this is an investment that if you hold on to, you should be able to see an increase in your dividend over the years, again, helping you gain more exposure to this ETF. Now, if you're somebody that likes either real estate exposure or bond exposure in your income producing investments, this might not be the fund for you as it's exclusively in stocks. But if you're okay with the stocks and the volatility that those can provide, then this might be a great investment for you. The next one that I have for you is the Global X Super Dividend US ETF. And the ticker symbol for this one is DIV. What's great about this ETF is that it has low volatility with a relatively high yield. And when you look at the companies that this is invested in, which we'll talk about in a moment, you can clearly see that this is an ETF that would get an approval or a check rating from Warren Buffett. And reason being is because it does invest in companies like Kraft Heinz, General Mills, Dominion Energy, yes, the one that Warren Buffett recently purchased. And so it's full of investments that, again, are relatively stable investments, but do provide a good dividend. And so who would benefit from owning on to DIV? If you're someone that is looking for income producing investments specifically through stocks, but don't like much fluctuation in your portfolio or want to minimize your risk, then this might be an investment worth taking a look at. Now, it's not going to offer the same kind of capital appreciation that the previous one, DIA, will, but it's going to keep your money safe where it is while, again, providing you with that monthly income from companies you probably already know. So also, if you're not a very experienced investor and want to stick to that theory of investing in what you know, this also might be something worth considering because the names that are listed on this are very big and well-known companies. Again, think of companies like Kraft Heinz, General Mills, Verizon, things that you probably use or see on a daily basis. And while this does have a small portion of real estate exposure in it, it does not have any exposure to bonds either. So let's just quickly here look through these numbers. We can see that this one's trading at around $14, just shy of $15 a share. So it does not have as much upfront capital or as much principal required to get started with this as DIA does, which is good to see. So if you don't have just $300 sitting there to go spend and invest, this might be worth looking at because you can get a few shares for less than $70, which is certainly enough to get you started. Over the past year, this paid about $1.69 in dividends, which makes sense. The last one was $5, almost $6. This one's just shy of $2, but the share price between these two is significantly different. And so with it being a lower cost investment to get started with, it is going to provide a little bit lower of a dividend. But again, bear in mind that if you reinvest these correctly, your portions should grow, or the amount of shares you own should grow rather quickly. And it's a lot easier for these to add up for you to start buying whole shares than it would be with something trading around $250. So great if you are somebody who just doesn't have as much capital readily available to put into an ETF. Now, of the ETFs we're taking a look at, this one does have the highest expense ratio at 0.46%. Again, it's less than 1% and it's still less than 0.5%. So it's still a very good expense ratio to see, especially if you're somebody like myself who likes to minimize the amount of costs in their portfolio. But you might be able to find other options out there with a little bit lower of an expense ratio, but I'm okay with the 0.46% if it comes to my personal portfolio. This one does have a dividend yield of about 11.44%, which is great to see, and a growth rate of 3.37%. Now you'll see that I did not include the years of growth, and that's because this one actually recently cut its dividend. Now it's still paying out to you monthly, so if you are looking to get started immediately, this one will start you with that immediate income producing investment. That being said, it's just paying less than it was a year or two ago at this time. And you didn't really think I would make a video about ETFs without talking about Vanguard. So the last one that I have for you is the Vanguard Mortgage-Backed Securities ETF, ticker symbol VMBS. Now this one's different than the other two that I just talked about because this one doesn't have any stock exposure. This is purely a real estate investment, so if you don't have any real estate exposure in your portfolio, this might be one worth taking a look at. Now this ETF invests mostly or almost entirely in US agency-backed pass-through securities. Basically what that means is it invests in companies like Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, or Freddie Mac, which if you're not familiar, those are all just mortgage lending companies. You can look into those separately if you'd like. So relatively safe investments, and again, ones that are US government agencies. This is one with a more, when it comes to mortgages, a little bit more of a moderate risk level. Now, that being said, the average maturity level for the investments inside of this ETF is around 3 to 10 years. Bear in mind, the longer your maturity is, generally the more risk you'll take on. And since these are going to be less than 10 years till maturity, it's going to be a little bit safer of an investment. But these are not bonds. These are people's mortgages, which is how these dividends are being created, or these distributions are being created. But bear in mind, this is not a bond investment. And who would benefit from this one? Well, if you're someone that's looking to reduce your overall risk in your portfolio, this would be a good one to invest in as well, given that it's mortgages, and generally mortgage investments are going to be less volatile than stock investments. Also, if you're already somebody that has heavy exposure to the stock market and are looking to diversify your portfolio through different securities, this one might be worth taking a look at. And lastly, if you are somebody again that's looking to produce income without experiencing market volatility, this is just another one worth considering because of the no exposure to stocks in this. But I'm sure, if we think back to 2008, there's always a chance of experiencing volatility, and that goes for any investment. So we should always just clarify, you always will experience some kind of fluctuation with your investment. But when you look outside stocks into more debt instruments like real estate or bonds, you'll see that the amount of volatility you experience significantly decreases. All right, so let's take a look at these numbers here. So a little bit more expensive than DIV, but still a lot cheaper than DIA. This one's trading at around $54 a share. For that, you get about $1.30 in last year's dividends if you held on to this last year, which is less than the DIV. So it's worth just taking a pause here and pointing out, yes, this one costs more and you don't receive as much as the dividend, but with that, you get a safer, and I'll put quotations around, a safer investment. Both DIV and VMBS are relatively low when it comes to volatility, but just bear in mind, the reason why somebody might choose VMBS at that higher price with a lower dividend payout is because they already have a heavy exposure into the stock market, or they just simply can't tolerate market fluctuations. So a great example of that would be times like right now, where the market is really going crazy without any rhyme or reason tied to it. And so if you're looking to get away from all of that craziness that's going on, but still want to be receiving an income without looking at bonds, that's where this comes into play. Another great thing about this investment is the expense ratio, and that's why I had to put a Vanguard one on here. We can see that this one only has a 0.05% expense ratio. By far the lowest of the three that we've talked about, which is a great thing because you're not going to be overpaying for this investment. And between this one and DIV, DIV was a 0.46, pays about 30 cents more in dividends. I'm sure somebody out there can do the calculations, but might pay off to have the lower expense ratio in lieu of receiving an extra 30 cents a year in dividends. Has a yield of 2.4%, so pretty normal to see and good to see, as well as the 5-year dividend growth rate is about 11.69%. Now this one as well, or also just cut its dividend or started to reduce that, which is a very common trend that we're seeing right now, and that's okay with me. I would rather see companies be smarter with their money and keep employees on their record books rather than just trying to increase their dividend. You can look into Walgreens if you want to hear why I'm saying that. And so I'm okay with dividends being reduced for the time being, not eliminated, just cut back a little bit. If that means that companies are able to hold on to employees, continue paying salaries, and helping other people be able to navigate and survive these interesting times. So, with that said, I think that wraps it up for today's episode. There are your 3 ETFs that will provide you with a monthly income. Notice that none of these have bonds in them. I can include bonds if you want me to do a follow-up to this, but it's kind of given that bonds pay a monthly dividend or have a monthly distribution. So if you want me to make a video on bond ETFs, I gladly will. But with that said, I think we'll go ahead and end it here. So I hope that you're able to maybe use one of these in your portfolio and start creating that monthly income for you. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to let me know about, please leave that down below and I'll be happy to help any way that I can help. or I always love hearing feedback. So if there's anything I can do to make these videos better or more entertaining, please also leave that down below and I'll gladly take that into consideration for my future videos. If you thought this was helpful, give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, then give it a thumbs down. If you haven't already, I'll just ask that you subscribe if that's something you're into, but don't feel pressed into subscribing. And yeah, so with that said, you can be anywhere in the world and you're right here with me. And I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, but I will let you go ahead and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.